Hello everyone, welcome to IPASS 2021. My name is Patricia King. I am a registered nurse and a faculty instructor at the College of Nursing at the University of Saskatchewan, and I was delighted to be invited to speak with you today. Today I thought we would talk about grit and grace and how both of those characteristics can help us recognize and cultivate resilience in not only ourselves, but also in others. I think that we need a balance of both grit and grace to manage ourselves in therapeutic relationships as well as interprofessional relationships. And I hope by the end of this presentation, you will agree with me. I want to acknowledge that I live and learn and experience life on the land and home of the Métis, Treaty 4, 6, and 10. And I would hope that as health professionals, we will rise to the occasion and the opportunities that exist within the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. And I hope that we can move from apology to action through authentic relationships. And I hope that our presentation together today will involve authenticity. So who am I and why am I here? As I've said, I'm a registered nurse, and I have been one for 32 years. It's very hard for me to believe that. But in that nursing experience, I have experienced many different roles. I've worked in adult ICU, adult CCU, pediatrics, neonatal intensive care, pediatric intensive care, community health, and of course, nursing education. And each of these life experiences has really shaped my values in terms of how I approach therapeutic relationships and also how I work interprofessionally. Currently, I teach in all years of the undergraduate nursing degree program, and I get the privilege of watching students develop their interprofessional and relational skills throughout their program. It does indeed bring me joy. In this presentation today, I really invite you to feel your emotions when I talk about things in relationship to how we show up. I think that self-reflection is critically important to getting something meaningful out of this presentation. I want you to know that I believe that stories are very powerful teachers, and that I hope throughout the presentation I can tell you a couple of stories from my clinical practice. Today I hope that we can look at all of the domains of learning that round out a health professional student. So the things that we learn in our head, that cognitive domain of learning. We'll talk about a few concepts that I think are critically important to relationships. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do with your hands, how you navigate conversations, some of the skills that you'll bring to your clinical practice. And we're going to dive deeply into the affective domain of learning and how you can feel the important things that you need to really cut in touch with to show up authentically in your therapeutic and interprofessional relationships. I just want to acknowledge that I think our sense of identity and the way that we learn has been shaped by a lifetime of experience. And that I think every learning experience requires a little strength and a little struggle. Perhaps maybe a little science, a little service. I might argue a little grit, a little grace. So in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the power of stories. We're going to talk about some underlying values and praxis concepts that can really shape how you show up in relationship in your clinical practice. We're going to talk about grit, how to recognize it in ourselves and in others. And we're going to talk about moments where we can approach things with grace. So very simply put, Webster's dictionary defines grit as firmness of mind or spirit, unyielding courage in the face of hardship or danger. You have grit. Your clients have grit. Your colleagues have grit. And grace has been defined as a disposition to or an act or instance of kindness, courtesy, or clemency. So I'd ask you to think about your grace. How do you show kindness and courtesy? Because those skills will affect how you show up in relationship. So a little bit about the power of story. Of course, in 30 to 45 minutes, there's no possible way that I can share every story that has shaped my grittiness and my gracefulness. But I do want to acknowledge that I have been privileged to work with so many folks over the course of my career, and each one of them a paradigm case, a learning, a moment of reflection wherein I could take something forward to shape my future practice. We call that narrative competence, the ability to hear a story, to experience a story, and to really get something out of that story in terms of how you move forward. I think as health professionals, we are challenged, but we are also given the opportunity to hear other people's stories. And it requires imagination, it requires interpretation, it requires empathy, and it requires us to recognize that their story has shaped how they have shown up. So I do want to acknowledge that we all have a story, and there's power in our stories, personally, professionally, and also for the clients we work with. So ask yourself, do I listen to other people's stories? Do I acknowledge my own story? Can I construct and reflect insights on those Can I gain insight from those reflections? The stories are what has shaped you. It is what has shaped others, and it really has cultivated you into being who you are at this given moment. And the cultivation is not over. In fact, as you enter your professional programs, the professional cultivation of who you are as nurse, physician, pharmacist, dentist, this is just starting. And this is a very exciting time for you to reflect and construct insights and how that will shape your clinical practice as you move forward. We're all here to become something, to achieve an identity. You've worked hard to get here. That's part of your story. It has required grit to become a student in any one of the colleges. And now the skill creation begins. The skill creation of how you will aesthetically show up as a student of nursing, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, other disciplines. So I'd ask you to think about, how can I experience my identity formation in this college? How can that identity formation involve others from other colleges? And how will it shape my grittiness and my gracefulness? I'm going to share with you two brief stories of two children that I have worked with who have become not only a model of grit, but a model of grace as well. So the first student was Blade, and this is a young man who came from a very challenged home environment. He was born to a mother with addictions, experienced multiple levels of trauma through his childhood, and ultimately was a child that I worked with in terms of health promoting and building some capacities in a counseling situation. Blade threatened my life with this knife. Now, what Blade modeled to me is the importance of story. His story was very complicated, and under pressure, when he pulled that knife on me, it required grace in my response. This is a skill, to respond gracefully. The second child I'll call Button, for the cigarette butts that exist in a Ziploc bag. When I first met this child, her job after school between 3:45 and 6 was to collect cigarette butts and not to come home before 6. Now, what she taught me was also revealed in her narrative. A very challenged young woman from a very challenged environment, lots of vulnerabilities, addictions, domestic violence, home insecurity, poverty, racism, and sexual abuse. Her grittiness to carry on in the face of adversity was mind-boggling. And she was so full of grace, open, respectful, hungry for relationship. So these children, while each of them challenged me professionally in different ways, their story revealed grit. And the answer to reaching and working with them effectively required grace from an interprofessional team of service. There is power in that story. Now, what I want to acknowledge is Blade and Button, and each of you who are listening, myself included, have been shaped and cultivated through life experience. And we carry many of those life experiences in an invisible backpack every single day, every single moment. Our past experiences shape how we show up. And in that invisible backpack, for many of us, there are very positive things. But for many of us, there are some very heavy things as well. And I think that when you construct or deconstruct what's in your backpack, I think you have the opportunity to discover how that can shape your clinical practice. How that, what you carry, can become part of the story of professional development. Some of what we've experienced, some of what we're carrying in those backpacks can shape our values, our moral standards. It affects our advocacy work. It affects our commitment to the work that we're about to develop, about to do, and the roles we're about to develop into. Many of us come with a backpack, as I said, full of challenge. Many of us come with a backpack full of privilege. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge if your backpack is filled with privilege. And to recognize that when we serve some of the most vulnerable, even though our backpack isn't perfect necessarily, it may be more privileged than those backpacks of others. So within that story, there are some underlying values and concepts that come out. And things like the determinants of health. Each of us has been shaped into the individual we are through some of these determinants of health. And some of us have had some, real challenge in pieces of these. And some of us have some real strengths or assets. Our clients, our colleagues show up next to us with their own set of determinants of health. And those affect how they show up in relationship. When we think about working with others in the health disciplines, we think about advocacy work, and we think about using and harnessing all of our knowledge and skills to work on behalf of someone else. And speaking up for the most vulnerable among us. And certainly within the health disciplines, that will exist in your scope of practice. But I would say that even when you show up and you engage in advocacy actions for others, ensure that you bring them alongside with you, that you share power with them, so that it's less of me and more of we. Because together, as an us, we can achieve change. This is philosophical in terms of how you will manage your power. Of course, many of you entered the health disciplines. You're really excited to be here, and we're excited to have you here. And there's sort of an underlying assumption that each of you has shown up with compassion. But what we know is that across disciplines, we work at various spheres of compassion. We work individually, in relationships. We work in communities, in societies. We each serve in different places. And we each bring knowledge, skills, and attitudes to that scope of practice. I'm going to encourage you to compassionately look around at the other disciplines and see what their roles are, to understand their responsibilities and to share your roles and responsibilities, to understand that to achieve systemic care, we need a team. We need to work together, harnessing compassion together to serve. This, of course, drives home the idea of social justice, that we're here to serve vulnerable folks, that we're here to meet the needs of our patients. And of course, the ethical lens of social justice can really fuel that work. And so I will ask you, as a new student in the health sciences, will you make social justice a part of your daily practice? What will that look like, sound like? What will that feel like for you and for others? How will you use your power to affect change? And will you think of every single interaction you have within your college as an opportunity for social justice? I want you to really consider the power of working with and for imbalance. That philosophical shift of power from me to we to us together can change the healthcare system. And that is our goal in interprofessional education, is to effectively work together. Now, what we realize as health professionals is there's a really big system. There's a context, an organization. There's certain lenses and expectations of our roles. And there are consequences if we don't meet our roles and our responsibilities. What I really want you to focus on as a developing health science student is what strategies are in your sphere of control. What can you do now, every day that you are a student in a health science discipline? What can you do in terms of how you communicate, how you lead, how you use those instrumental skills to partner with others, how you express yourself, how you carry yourself? Now, here's the thing. In some of our science disciplines, some of these soft skills are maybe devalued or underappreciated or maybe deprioritized. But what I'm going to say to you after 32 years of nursing practice is that these skills are where change happens. when folks bring these skills, I see opportunity. It becomes very clear to me that this is our place to effect change in a system that has been deprioritizing shared ownership. We want our clients, anyone we serve, anyone we work with, to feel empowered, valuable, respected. We want to treat others with humanity in this system. And I would say that that starts with those soft skills. I have had some incredible students over the years. I think I've taught more than 1,000 students at this point. And Jagpreet is a student who really made me think. And I just wanted to give her a shout out here. She shared with me social justice, or lack thereof, is in our everyday practice as nurses, and I would say as every health professional. We are at the crossroads between public policy and personal lives. We need to strive to overcome oppression, she says. It's not enough to be a compassionate witness. So what change agency, what talent will you bring to your interprofessional work so that you can move beyond the role of compassionate witness? That is your challenge. That is your opportunity in the health sciences. I believe we can do that working together effectively, collaboratively, respectfully. Now, to make sense of all of this, we need clinical judgment, and this is something that you will perfect as you move through your clinical program or your professional college. Clinical judgment requires a professional to notice, interpret, respond, reflect. Notice, interpret, respond, reflect. Notice, interpret, respond, reflect. What will you notice in relationship with others? How will you interpret the situations that you encounter in your discipline? How will you react? What skills will you use? What goals will you identify? What actions will you take? And then upon reflection, what will you evaluate? How will you have grown? How will it direct your continuing competence as you move forward? Clinical judgment is really important, regardless of discipline. And clinical judgment requires every one of us as professionals to link our decisions to client needs. After all, we are here to serve others. So moving on, I've said that you've shown up with some grittiness. Your colleagues have shown up with grittiness. Your patients, your clients will serve, and that you serve will show up with some grittiness. Your challenge is to identify the strengths that people come to, the strengths that you come with. Because it's those strengths, those internal assets that people have, that affect how they cope and change and grow and develop over time. So things like your traits, your assets, your capabilities, any qualities that you have. These are things that you can bring to your professional college, to your interprofessional relationships, to the therapeutic relationships that you will have with your clients. Now, what we know is that resilience is made up of internal, individual things. It's affected by family, protective things, and it's affected by the larger community. And so you can ask yourself at any given time when you are assessing whether or not someone has the grittiness to navigate a situation, is it individual, family, or community? So these are some of the things that give us individual resilience. And I think as you look through the list, you will probably identify some of the things that you have had to recognize and embrace your grittiness around. So for example, self-efficacy, really challenging to get into some of our professional programs, and yet here you are. There was a belief that you could do that. Now we can shift this lens away from the self and look at others, and look at our colleagues that we're learning with, and identify what individual resiliency factors do they have. And then, of course, we can shift it even further away to the people that we work for and with, and identify what is in their individual protective factors. We can reflect on our own families of origin, how we've grown up, how the people in our lives shape our resiliency in any given moment. We can look at our colleagues and see some of those family mechanisms for them, and we can look at the people we serve and see it for them, the people we interact with. When people have these things, they're more likely to be resilient, to carry on and carry through. And then, of course, there are some community things that can affect our ability to carry on and carry through. And I think what I want to point out in this one is the importance of peer acceptance. And so when you start to walk through the health science building, let's all commit to accepting each other as peers, not the same. We're not all good at the same things, but we're all good at something. And in that supportive community of health science students, we can create resiliency that can serve the healthcare system moving forward for years. Now, sometimes when we take a look at ourselves, a look at the people we're learning next, aside or beside, and the people we're serving, we sometimes will see that resilience is lacking. And it is our opportunity then to step up and show up with grace and be kind, to hear others' stories, to recognize, is there anything within my locus of control that I can contribute as a peer, as a colleague, as a caregiver? And what we know, of course, is that trauma can certainly affect someone's long-term resilience. And I think that that will be incredibly important as a health professional when you're working in therapeutic relationships, to recognize the effect that trauma can have on individuals, families, and communities. And we don't have to look very hard to see that in Saskatchewan. So we've taken a look at our values. We've taken a look at some of the things that can provide us some of that grittiness. And let's talk now about grace and how we can embrace the idea of kindness to create a community of care, a community of respect, a community of interdisciplinarity. So now here's an important idea. To show up in relationship with self, others, or clients, we need to think about our power and how others perceive our power. So I'll ask you to think about, how do you manage your power? And how do you respond to power? And I believe that interprofessionally, we need to embrace shared power, shared decision-making, collaboration. We want to embrace patient and family-centered care. And of course, to do that, we need trust. And trust starts at IPASS 2021. Nurses can bring this. Pharmacists can bring this, medicine can bring this, etc., etc., etc. We all bring something to the table. We are all powerful. You want to make sure that as you are building others up, you're bringing the right tools. You're bringing the skills that you have, the talents that you'll have, the techniques that you will learn to create humanistic interprofessional collaboration. I learned that from some of my most challenging clients. This is about how I show up. This is about how you show up. To maintain a relationship, a therapeutic relationship with both of these clients was very challenging, and it required me to really embrace the values of social justice, to understand the power of narrative, to identify my advocacy actions, to recognize their determinants of health, and then to use my relational talents and skills to respond effectively. What we know from research is that social support is a huge determinant of healthcare utilization, of physical and mental health, and also on health behavior. So if we can imagine ourselves as contributing as health professionals to people's social support network, then we can have a huge impact on outcomes, on experiences. We can have a huge outcome on their story, on what they'll continue to take forward in that backpack. That is your responsibility, to create social support for the people that you're working with and for. So how do we cultivate resilience in ourselves and others? We need to identify the strengths of the people we are and the people around us. We need to understand other people's perceptions. We need to ask the questions. What's important to you? What are you good at? What can I help you with? Listen, observe, recognize that people come with strengths regardless of how complicated the stories are. Blade's sense of humor, the best. Button's open heart, kindness, humility, admirable. So identifying strengths, this is really about, are you half full or half empty? And in some of our disciplines, there's a real focus on problem. And so I think it's always important for us to make sure we're balancing problems, needs with opportunities, capacities. When you give feedback to somebody's strengths, please make sure it's genuine. Make sure it's specific and descriptive and sincere and truthful, because if it's not, and it's not received that way, you will damage that professional relationship. Think about giving your patients a commendation. Look deeper at complex cases and find a strength. Look around at others. See what they're doing well. Give them feedback. I admire this. I appreciate the way you do that. When you develop your own capacities and you develop other people's capacities, you really will be cultivating resilience for that person, shaping the narrative, affecting the backpack. There are 3 ways that we can do this as health professionals. We can help them transfer learning from one place to the next. And so you will do that in the CLRC, you will do that in learning groups, you will do that in OSCE preparations for each other. And then hopefully you will do it behind the curtain for the clients that you work with. You can maybe use the idea of cognitively reframing something as, instead of work, think of it as an opportunity. Instead of thinking about it as hard, think about it as a challenge. There is power in the way that you will speak about your learning in your health disciplines. And I think it is really important for you to recognize what you're good at and to recognize what you still need to sharpen your pencil on, and that is okay as a beginning health science student. You need to grow and learn and work toward building a toolkit. It takes time and energy, and it takes grit, and it takes grace when it doesn't go well. You need to harness all those supports. So maybe do some reflection. What are my internal resiliency strengths? What are my family resiliency strengths? What are my community strengths? And really call those forward, because you've got a really great opportunity in your new discipline to really blossom, to achieve your goals. And that's so exciting. To call forth those strengths, to call it forth for others. Again, recognize the system is big and you're just getting started. And so a really realistic place to start is with your own communication and leadership skills, with those soft empathy, problem-solving skills. This is in your circle of control to really cultivate the self. You are the tool. What we envision is an interprofessional system that serves others respectfully, humanely, in a shared ownership way. And until we achieve that as health disciplines, the system will stay very stagnant. We have opportunities to create change. And I think it starts with learning togetherness. So togetherness is really about stretching our boundaries. So instead of seeing yourself as just a nursing student, see yourself as a health science student with a nursing knowledge, a health science student with medical knowledge, pharmaceutical knowledge. Like, we all can collaborate. Let's step outside of our comfort zones and really embrace collaborative zones. It is my opinion that when we're confused and we're working with, for example, a really complex case, the confusion can bring us together as professionals. If we trust each other, we can work together. If we share our goals and have a vision, we can keep together. Only through collaboration can we create a strong team. I would say that there is strength in the collective. I don't know how many of you are listening to this, but I know you're from all different disciplines, all with different narratives, different backpacks. But they can be strength in that collective. We need to take some risks to get to know one another, to respect one another, to let others into our worlds. We need to be able to rely on other professionals. Everybody has a skill. They're not all the same, but together, the collective can be very influential. Now, for some of you, that's going to really challenge you to let go of your control and your comfort zone. Maybe to soften the grit and increase the grace. The opportunity is yours. These are some of the things that I think are really important as you move forward and try to cultivate that grace in relationship. I think it is important to foster a culture of acceptance, teamwork, and partnership. I am married to a physician. He is married to a nurse. We are both good at things, but we are good at different things. I think it is important for you to be aware of and responsible for your competencies. And there are many competencies to interprofessional work that you will need. Things like role clarity, conflict resolution skills, shared ownership and leadership skills. These are important competencies that it's up to you to figure out what you're already good at, to bring that gracefully, and to figure out what you're not so good at and find the grit to develop the skill. I think fundamentally it all starts with your relational skills, how you show up in any given learning encounter. I'd ask you to continually read the room, to reflect in the moment, after the fact. That reflection in action and on action can reveal the opportunity that exists for you. I think you need to balance your self-awareness with other awareness. And you need a deep and wide situational repertoire, because as health professionals, we can work with all kinds of folks. I think I would say there's no clear map on how to get to it, to get through it, but follow your compass. All of us showed up in a health discipline because we want to make a difference in other people's lives. That's your compass. So I'll ask you to just pause and reflect for a moment. How can the things that Nurse Tish is talking about actualize themselves in my learning environment? How can I bring those attitudes, those skills, that grit and grace to the CLRC? How can I bring it to my first OSCE, my first clinical experience, my first therapeutic interview? How can I bring my leadership? How can I identify what's in my backpack so that it shapes my clinical practice positively? How can I use teamwork to improve my outcomes? How can we embrace each other as a collective in solidarity? And if we did that, what would the system look like, sound like, and feel like? How will I make a positive impact on care in my own discipline? And probably importantly, how will I acknowledge when I see others in other disciplines showing and modeling that grace? I want to finish with my favorite quote. I hope that it speaks to you the way that it speaks to me. It motivates me every day to show up with a nice balance of grit and grace. I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a healthcare professional, I possess tremendous power to make life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration, and I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis is escalated or de-escalated, and if a person is humanized or dehumanized. If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them to become what they are capable of becoming. I sincerely wish you an awesome experience in your health science discipline. You've shown up. You have grit. You have grace. Enjoy the journey.